my birthday.
Oh, cool. Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome to the Hoon, where co-host Peter Bale and I go around the week's news in geopolitics and Aotearoa's political economy with a whole bunch of experts, academics and politicians, all to understand our worlds better and have some fun. Well, tēnā koutou katoa, everyone. I'm Bernard Hickey, co-host of The Hoon on the Kaka. Peter Bale is our co-host from Hoon Bay. Peter,
Bernard,
how's it going?
so good to see you, and I apologise to everybody for missing last week. You know, I wouldn't miss if I could possibly do it, and I was flat out asleep with a very nasty man flu. So
Man flu.
I'm back, and everything's good. I fish and chips with you last night in Hoon Bay, as we do from time to time, and you know, you wrapped your lips around a Negroni, a couple of Negronis, I think, possibly.
Yes, and
Yes.
I'm feeling it today, but that's okay. I'm getting older, and so are the various filtering devices in my body. I love that jacket, Peter. By the
Thank
way,
you, Bernard.
lovely
Well,
to
I
see
did
you.
off. Yeah, okay, so next time you're over, I got it from a lovely chap called Robert in Three Lamps, in the Crane Brothers store in Three Lamps. It's suede, and Robert, who has two, not one but two Triumph 2500s from the early 1980s or late 1970s, is a very sail finishes.
Yes, I shall.
We've got to get you. You know, we've got. You know, yeah, because I did notice. Oh, actually, I think I did notice that there were a couple of holes in your sweatshirt in your merino. Yeah, yeah.
Yes, I need to use some of the funds very gratefully received from subscribers to
Yes.
replace my my
Exactly.
skivvy
And I'm the
after
man
about
to.
a
You know, I'm
decade.
very happy to take you shopping, Bernard.
Oh,
You know, it would be my privilege to take you shopping, having I've
yeah.
done
Well,
it for many years.
shopping is something that not a lot of people are doing at the moment
No.
in New Zealand. I had a look at the retail sales in inflation adjusted terms per capita, and we are back down to the levels we saw before the global financial crisis. It's extraordinary. That's what
Yeah.
happens when you have very tight monetary policy and also tightening fiscal policy at the same time. Everyone's a
And
little
also
bit
just a
freaked.
sense of, that we're constantly talking down our own economy.
Yeah.
You know, this is definitely the feeling. I was in a restaurant, very nice new restaurant in Ponsonby Road last night, which I thoroughly recommend, called San Rey, which is a Spanish restaurant run by the couple that own or look after Cazador in Dominion Road. So I mean, I don't want to turn myself into Jesse Mulligan, partly because I can't really stand Jesse Mulligan. But anyway,
Oh, I love Jesse.
I thoroughly
Jesse's great.
recommend. If I have to listen, oh, is it him or Wallace that does the panel?
It's Wallace that does the panel.
Yeah.
Jesse has that afternoon show from
Yeah.
2 and
Actually, I find them both completely unlistenable. But anyway, we were by the end of the evening, we were the only
love
couple,
them.
only people sitting in the restaurant, and I was a little worried about it from that point of view. Everything did just seem very, very quiet, and I was quite struck listening to Nicola Willis this morning, talking what seemed to be absolute bollocks about capital gains tax, Bernard.
yes, this has been the stir this week with Antonia Watson, the CEO of ANZ New Zealand, coming out and sort of surprisingly saying, you know, it's time for a capital gains tax on the realised gains on rental properties and properties beyond the family home. This is, you know, one of these dogs with a bone that our political economy has. We've always got it in our mouths and we're always shaking it, and it never seems to go away. And part of the reason is there's never really been a consensus in the what you call the business community. And when the person running the institution with the most at stake in the housing market, and that is ANZ, then it's worth taking a note of. Also, her boss used to be the chair of ANZ New Zealand was John Key. Now he's not there anymore.
No.
But John Key is someone that you'd think that Christopher Luxon listens to closely. And in theory, Key is Luxon's mentor. He was certainly Luxon's chair when Luxon was CEO at Air New Zealand. And to come out after these comments from Antonia Watson, and to say that she shouldn't get involved in politics, that it
Jesus.
would be
Yeah.
nice if ANZ actually gave back some of their high profits, and that she wanted New Zealanders to pay more tax. It was a uncivil and unattractive thing
Yeah.
for a PM to do, to
Yeah.
essentially kick
He is
down.
he is increasingly unattractive. He gets a little bit shitty, a little bit riled. But what I was also struck by, Bernard, and we could do this at the end of the show if you like, but if since it's a New Zealand subject, but Nicola Willis seemed to be talking absolute bollocks about the damage that a capital gains tax would do to the rest of investment, and that it was a brilliant, inward investment tactic to have no capital gains tax. And I just thought that was, as you know, Bernard, I quite like the fact that there isn't a capital gain tax, and I'm not sure I trust either party to spend my tax dollars. But not to sound too much like either Elon Musk or David Seymour, which who haven't ever been combined before, but. That idea that it's sort of anti-growth to have one is just mad. It seemed to me, especially given the housing predominance.
Yeah, we've got a problem in that New Zealanders have worked out that capital gains on the value of their equity in their homes, not just the ones they live in, but the others that they can get their hands on, is tax-free.
Yeah,
And it's the only asset in the country that you can borrow money from a bank from relatively easily and relatively cheaply. So you are getting not just tax-free capital gains, you are getting leveraged and tax-free capital gains in an asset that you're probably able to live in, push comes to shove, and that you probably understand a bit better than if you had to make a bet on some stock.
yeah, some equities, exactly.
And so, New Zealanders have worked this out. It turns out, though, of course, we're the only country in the world that doesn't have one of these things, to the point where actually in Australia this week, the Prime Minister, a Labor Prime Minister, is saying he wants to look at getting rid of actually making Australia's capital gains tax tougher. Now, one interesting thing that happened in Australia about a decade ago was that John Howard halved the capital gains tax. And there was an immediate doubling of house prices, which, homeowners love. But now we have this problem where young people can't get into housing. Housing costs dominate everything. And it's very strange to hear you say that a capital gains tax is some sort of superpower.
Yeah,
New Zealand
I thought that was very
not having
weird.
one.
Bernard, shall we come back to that at the end, because I just wanted to mention, let's tell people what we're doing, and I want to mention what's also coming up this week, because you're speaking, and think tomorrow night you're hosting an event tomorrow night about, speaking of housing, about I was going to say Waka Kotahi, but about Kāinga Ora. And the sort of destruction we've seen of the entire sort of infrastructure and approach to housing, public housing in New Zealand, that's gone on and been accentuated this week. You're going public on all of this tomorrow night.
Yes, so tomorrow night I'm going to be sitting down with Philippa Howden-Chapman. She is a former director of Kāinga Ora and well recognised as, one of the grandees, if you like, of New Zealand's housing academia. She's one of the longest and strongest researchers on housing issues. And we're going to get together in Grey Lynn. That is tomorrow night at 6:30 or so. And
it's
I'll
the
put
Fabian Society, is that right? That's putting
right.
it on? Excellent.
And I will put a link in the show notes to the introduction with all the details. So I'm going to be sitting down with Philippa after she's given a presentation. This is about what Kāinga Ora has done in recent years, what is now happening with it. We obviously heard this week another 330 jobs to go. This is on top of a couple of hundred that were previously announced. Essentially, Kāinga Ora has stopped new building. It is reconfiguring itself into being an asset manager, not an asset builder. And literally thousands of houses that were being built are now not being built. And it's one of the reasons we're in a recession. And so Philippa is going to lay out what Kāinga Ora was doing, and the destruction.
And what's been lost. And it'll be very, I may well come, Bernard, but we've got Catherine a little bit. So we're going to have Catherine on the environment shortly, climate change. We've got Robert Patman as usual, and we'll talk about what's going on in Lebanon and northern Israel and in Gaza, and we'll move also to Ukraine and what's happening at the UN General Assembly at the moment, right? And then we've got a guest on the New Zealand politics, Bernard.
That's right. We have Matt Halliday from Comms Declare. It is a group that is studying the ad agencies and PR agencies in New Zealand that are doing work for fossil fuel companies. Now, this is a global effort to identify and challenge PR and ad agencies doing work for fossil fuel companies. And remember that these are the companies who hid the truth about climate change and have screwed the scrum of global democracy by delaying, deflecting, denying all sorts of truths and putting all sorts of, sending everyone down all sorts of dead ends, including carbon capture and storage, and should, I think, and many others also think, be treated like tobacco companies. They are beyond the pale.
But Bernard, they're not advertising. They are like the tobacco companies. They're not advertising tobacco consumption or fossil fuel consumption. They're just doing brand choice.
Brand choice. Well, they're advertising a product that is killing our grandkids.
Yeah.
Is the truth of it. And as we're about to hear.
Speaking of our grandchildren, segue to Catherine.
Yes, and the issue of climate change. We will come back to the issue of the fossil fuel companies. But Catherine, there's been some big research come out this week, which probably no one's heard about, which we'd like to keep you in touch with. It is a big deal. Tell us about this research going back millions of years, which can give us a sense of how warm our planet might get.
Yeah, so this was a really great piece of research done by some excellent, highly respected climate researchers who looked at the paleoclimate record. So they went back 485 million years and looked at Earth's temperature over that time period, and they filled in a lot of gaps and got a much better understanding of particularly the relationship between carbon dioxide and temperature over that 485 million years of Earth's history. So some of their findings have been really very interesting. They found, first of all, that temperatures were more dynamic than anticipated, and that the main driver of those temperature changes was CO2 in the atmosphere. So we kind of know that that's the main driver today, but it helps to know that, or have it confirmed, that it was the case over the last 485 million years as well. They also found that when the climate was hotter over that time period, during the warm periods, it was actually hotter than we had currently believed. So it got hotter during those warm periods than what we thought. And that has some implications for that relationship between CO2 and temperature. Now, they've come out with a Earth system sensitivity of 8 degrees Celsius over...
And this is important because we really need to know how much the Earth is going to heat up every time we double the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere.
Is that what it is? A sort of what does an 8 degrees sensitivity mean, Catherine?
So yeah, it does exactly that. What Bernard said. It's looking at how much does the temperature go up when we double the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. But there is a couple of different measures of climate sensitivity. So there's one, the Earth system sensitivity that this study looks at very long-term effects. So it's looking at, it includes things that happen over hundreds or thousands or even millions of years. So it might look at the feedback from things like losing ice shelves and changes to the vegetation on Earth. So the feedbacks from those sort of things would be included in it. We often, when we talk about what's the temperature going to be like in the year 2100, we're talking about a measure known as equilibrium climate sensitivity. And that tends to look more at the sort of feedbacks that happen over decades, maybe 100 years, but not those really long-term ones. So there's a lot more uncertainty about the longer-term stuff than there is about the shorter term one, but there is a relationship between them. They are still measuring what ultimately is the outcome of doubling CO2 in the atmosphere. And 8 degrees, that figure, that's a lot higher than the suggestions, like a lot. And so we need a lot more research actually to really sort of understand what feedback mechanisms that 8 degrees is associated with and what sort of timescales they happen on. because we're working on the assumption at the moment that the equilibrium climate sensitivity is around 3 degrees Celsius. So if you double CO2, we will end up with a 3-degree increase. And we've talked before about some of the debate around this with climate scientist James Hansen coming out and saying that he thinks that number is more like 4.8 degrees, so plus or minus 1.2, but around. So he thinks it's a lot higher than what we currently have in our models. And this sort of relook at the paleo record tends to, along with a few other studies, is kind of supporting this idea that climate sensitivity might actually be higher than what we have been assuming. Now the current models are very accurate at forecasting the recent past, and so if the climate sensitivity is a lot higher than we think, then something else must be going on that's cooling things down. James Hansen's idea for that is that aerosols are responsible for more cooling than what we ascribe to them. But,
we're just taking them out. We're just taking those aerosols out of the fuels in the ships going across the Atlantic.
That's right, and they have a cooling effect. So, but not everybody agrees on this stuff, and there's still a lot more that we need to learn about it. So,
yeah. But is this one of these, absolutely wild studies, completely off the planet that we can ignore, or is it something that hey, it's one study and we should keep an eye on it, but not necessarily take too many glasses of macaroni?
Yeah. So when I saw the study, I was kind of like, I'm not quite sure how to interpret that because that's such a big figure, and I don't, I'm not 100% sure what to make of it. So I biffed off a quick email to one of my colleagues at Victoria, at Te Herenga Waka, Professor James Renwick, and said, what do you make of this study? Is it, should I pour myself a really large drink tonight, or is it not quite that bad? And he came back saying, well, the people who did the study are very highly respected, and the modelling techniques that they've used are really well accepted and well regarded. So this is a solid study. It's meaningful. We've seen some other studies come out in recent years that are suggesting that climate sensitivity may be higher than what we've got it at. So, there's obviously a lot more research needs to be done. This is just one study, but it's meaningful.
And on the current trajectories, depending on how successful we are in reducing carbon emissions, we're going to be doubling the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, probably 2050 to 2080. And this means that we go from 280 parts per million to 560 parts per million. We're currently at 422 or so. And if we are going to heat the planet, more like 4 degrees than 2 degrees by 2080 or so, that it means that our kids and grandkids are in a world of pain.
Yeah, so just to be clear about that, there is, what that particular study is talking about is feedbacks that happen over hundreds or thousands of years. But there's got to be some relationship between climate sensitivity in the shorter term and the longer term. We're just not sure what that is yet. We're not sure what those mechanisms are. So, it's worrying that it might be more than what we currently think it is, but it may not, as
And the study was also saying that sometimes the changes have happened quite quickly in the past.
Yeah, but they're talking about 485 million year timelines as well. Like the heating the amount of CO2 that we're putting into the atmosphere at the moment is much faster than anything that's happened in that last 485 million years. So what we're doing at the moment in terms of increasing CO2 in the atmosphere is very, very fast by any look at the paleo record. So there will be a time lag in terms of what sort of, and also those big, that 8 degrees, for instance, that would assume that we maintained those very elevated levels of CO2 in the atmosphere for all of that time. And so that kind of brings back into question those things about, can we actually reduce the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere in the future, or are we going to keep topping it up all the time and keeping it,
Catherine, I noticed that Mark Dalder had a piece today which suggested that the government is going to change the way it accounts for the New Zealand climate targets, suggesting that older forests are actually retaining more than they might, which might help the government avoid having to redo its Paris targets. Do you know about that?
I don't know. I haven't seen that particular article, but there has been some debates or some conversations going on in the background about changes to the measurements that are based on things like that, and whether we just whether that then enables us to be more ambitious, or whether we just absorb them into, oh, good, we don't have to do as much now. And so there's already, I think, been some changes that have been put into the calculation mix. For most people who are active in climate change, they would say, well, that means then that we have more scope to be more ambitious, and that's what the Paris Agreement is set up to do, to ratchet up our targets as these sort of things happen. But yeah, there is a very real chance that the current government will just choose to try and absorb them into, good, that's a job
Mark
we don't
is
have to do
reporting
anymore.
that Todd McClay, the forestry minister, sought advice from officials this year about how management of the pre-1990 forestry, which is 1.4 million hectares of planted trees and 7.8 million hectares of natural forest, could contribute to meeting New Zealand's climate obligations.
Yeah,
And,
I mean, it's
a very
back to
interesting
the old
shift.
dodgy accounting tricks,
Exactly.
isn't it?
Speaking of which, here's Robert.
Good evening.
Good
Hi,
evening,
Robert. How are you?
Thank
Dodgy
you very much,
Robert,
Catherine.
yeah.
No, please not. No. We don't think that of you. And just so we thought we'd probably talk first of all about Israel, Hezbollah, Israel, Gaza, and what's happening at the United Nations with this idea, I think, of a 21-day ceasefire. But I also just wanted to say, partly because I was going to do this anyway, but Artie Farty 87, who was one of our audience members, asked about Hala. What? Are you worried that I'm bringing up the audience again?
Go for it, sorry.
Wanted to know how Hala Jabba, my friend in Beirut, was, who we talked to about 3 weeks ago. She actually apologised to me today, Robert, for not getting back to you. Now, Hala's flying today to Beirut. She's going in when everybody else is going out because she wants to secure her mother's safety and potential exit from Beirut. So that's where Hala is. She should be on with us next week. She couldn't do it today. And I just wanted to mention that because it was very kind of people like you to ask how she was, and she's certainly rather strident on X at the moment, but in her view of the Israelis. But Robert, what do you subscribe to the idea that this is all about Netanyahu trying to stay in power as long as possible, potentially until a Trump presidency?
It can't be discounted. He is a political survivor and has been throughout his career. And it's no secret that he's had massive demonstrations against him, both before the current crisis in Gaza, that's before the events of the 7th of October, and subsequently afterwards. And afterwards, the demonstrations have largely, and one was 600,000 recently, I believe, in Tel Aviv. And that was because a lot of Israelis are not convinced he is doing everything possible to get the hostages out. And
Definitely.
this brings up the whole question of whether Mr. Netanyahu is more interested in his political survival by continuing to expand the war. Already, he has expanded the war without achieving his core objective in Gaza, which is the eradication of Hamas. He said that they had to see it through, and that relentless military pressure would create an environment in which the hostages would be released. Well, that hasn't happened yet, unfortunately. And he has been against the ceasefire. And, of course, there's a bit of speculation that people are saying that Mr. Netanyahu is holding out for a Trump administration before he agrees to a ceasefire. An interesting thought. But I do think Mr. Netanyahu has been keen on expanding the war for some time. I don't think it's just down to his desire to politically survive. That from his point of view, while the war's going on, less questions asked about the sort of charges he was facing for corruption before the war began. So that's true. But
Well,
I think
also when he's under a
given-
war footing, Robert, he's much less likely to face a challenge, right? Either from the Supreme Court or from the opposition. Correct.
But I think there is another substantive component here that we mustn't overlook. Mr. Netanyahu, and he's proud of this, is a dedicated opponent of any Palestinian state. And he will see, by weakening Hezbollah, in expanding the war, in his words, weakening all of Israel's enemies with the support of the United States, ideally,
Yeah.
although America could pull the plug on it, at least in theory, then he'll be achieving his objective of setting back the desire for a Palestinian state for a long time. As somebody said recently in Washington, the way things are going, there won't be the territorial space for a Palestinian state. So,
Correct.
to use
Yeah.
Netanyahu's terms, he's changing the facts on the ground. So I think it's a combination of desire for political survival, but also he sees a wonderful opportunity to, if you like, finish off the job that he's been dedicated to for the last 25 years, since the mid-90s, which is to see off the prospect of a Palestinian state.
And of course, we should say that 60,000, I think, Israelis have had to move south from the border areas up against southern Lebanon. Hezbollah fired a surface-to-surface missile at Tel Aviv yesterday. They fired some at Haifa, which is an incredibly important port. And of course, Hezbollah has been firing, I think, 6,000 or 7,000 missiles, over the past few months. I mean, we're also heading very quickly towards the October the 7th anniversary of the Hamas attack on Israel, and we'll have there'll be a saga around that. It's just he seems to be coming up with impediment after impediment to a ceasefire in Gaza. We talked about the Philadelphia corridor, which is this very narrow strip, but is intended to prevent goods getting across from Israel. And now we've got this supposed necessity, of course it's understandable, to get Israelis back into those homes and out of the range of Hezbollah rockets.
Yes, but look at the costs he's prepared to incur in order to do that. We know that, and unfortunately, Halal Jabba would know much better than I do, but the number of Lebanese who've had to evacuate because of the
It's huge.
Israeli airstrikes, it's huge. It's far more than probably 60,000. And the other thing is we have to account is the appalling casualties that are occurring. I think it was 590 yesterday or the day before, which is the
35
highest
children.
death rate since I think was the 2006 conflict.
Yeah.
I mean, it's. I do get the feeling Mr. Netanyahu was looking, finding another rationale for blocking a ceasefire, but ultimately, the Americans are allowing him to do this. They can pull the plug on this if they wish to.
And Bernard's best to come in about Iran. Me too. So please, Bernard, go ahead.
So, Robert, if the Americans aren't going to do anything, why aren't the Iranians really going ballistic? Because they've threatened to, and the Israelis seem to have prodded them, and nothing's happened. And maybe the Israelis think, maybe we can get away with it. The Iranians will do nothing. So, what's the Iranian response likely?
I think the Iranian response is quite satisfaction so far because China and Iran, and to a lesser extent Russia, have been the principal beneficiaries of Biden's policy towards Gaza. It's further inflated their position in the region. So they may be reticent. I do not think the United States or Iran wants to get engaged in a full-scale regional war in the Middle East. My view is that the Iranians are watching carefully. I mean, Hezbollah is an Iranian proxy. They're supplied by Iran, and I think they basically comply with much of what Iran wants. If Hezbollah gets degraded to the extent to which Israel would like in the next week or so, then I think it will be very difficult for an Iranian government not to step in. And if they step in, then I
I
think
mean, that's
the
the
United
true
States
that's
would
the
feel
true escalation risk, isn't it? I mean, I have actually been
Yes.
surprised at the extent to which Biden and Keir Starmer in the UK, for example, have talked about escalation, because so far there really hasn't been this level of escalation. And it's also important, I think, Robert, to remember that they're attacking Hezbollah, not Lebanon itself, theoretically.
Yes, but let's be quite clear. That is a theoretical observation. And lots of innocent people who are not attached to Hezbollah are getting killed.
Yeah.
And it seems that Mr. Netanyahu, who's actually I'm a bit surprised the Biden administration haven't been sharper with Netanyahu, since Mr. Netanyahu is openly supporting Trump in the presidential election and being dismissive of the aid he's received from the Biden administration. Well, when is America going to be a superpower in relation to Gaza and Lebanon? When's it going to start laying down the law to its strategic allies? And it's an extraordinary situation where the United States seems to be bullied a lot of the time and almost cowering at what's happening. And I don't know if you saw Mr. Biden's speech again in the UN General Assembly. Earnest appeals for a ceasefire. Time is now.
And then sort of thinking, hang on a minute, who could actually bring that about?
Yes.
It was like, if only a superpower would act.
It's almost as if it's nothing to do with the United States and they regret the situation that's developing. Yeah. What can they do to help?
Yeah.
And then, of course, they're deeply complicit in this carnage. And it's doing nothing. America's almost lackey behaviour at the moment towards Netanyahu is not winning any respect in Iran or China.
But is there an issue, though, here?
And they seem to have now stopped this discussion of a... Sorry, forgive me.
Sorry, Bernard.
Go ahead.
Is there, though, a window in which the Americans can't really respond because they don't want to be launching a war with Iran or supporting Israel in a war with Iran, 3 weeks out from the election?
No. It's a bit more than 3 weeks, though, isn't it? It's about November. Yep.
Plenty of time for a decent little war between them.
Look, I agree with...
It would change the complexion completely.
I agree with the premise. They do not want a war before the election. Probably don't want one afterwards. I don't think the United States... I think it's genuine when it says that Mr. Biden has emphasised this repeatedly in the last 48 hours. America does not like the escalation to a regional war. But Mr. Netanyahu has made no secret of the fact that he would like to take care of Iran while he's at it. Yeah. And he knows he can't do that on his own. So that involves America doing a lot of the heavy lifting there. I mean, he's probably gambling that a Trump administration might just do that. I think that's a huge gamble. But
what do you think? What did you think of New Zealand's slight tweak to its position and separation from the Five Eyes countries in the vote on this issue during the week?
I thought it was excellent. And I'm pleased. They've still got some way to go, however. But I thought it was recognition by the I think you're referring to the vote in the General Assembly, which said in relation to the ICJ recommendation that the occupied territories were subject to unlawful occupation by Israel. Yep. And that New Zealand and everyone else should take note. And New Zealand supported that. It's not the first time we've parted company with the Five Eyes partners over Gaza and the occupied territories. But I think it's important. It'd be interesting to see what Mr. Peters says in the General Assembly tomorrow.
And what Robert did you make of the David Seymour remark that he would have liked Peters to have discussed that shift or that slight change in policy in cabinet, because he was getting pressure, particularly I think he said from his Jewish constituency in Epsom. That seemed quite an interesting intervention between the two would-be deputy prime ministers.
I think it's quite a fragile relationship. But Mr. Peters had a bit of a bust up with Helen Clark last week as well. I saw that. And the interesting thing, this is quite relevant to the point you've just raised, is that actually, despite their differences over AUKUS, Helen and Winston are exactly on the same page when it comes to UN Security Council reform. Yeah. But I think Mr. Peters took exception to the fact that Helen Clark, who was actually simply acting as a member of the Elders, a group of former leaders set up by Nelson Mandela in 2007, was delivering a message on behalf of the group.
Absolutely.
That there should be
Wasn't
UN
just
Security.
hers.
Yeah. There should be UN Security Council reform so that it can fulfill its responsibilities to maintain global peace and security. I think Mr. Peters said something along the lines of, when you leave the stage, you've got to know, not to get back on the stage or something like that, which was nothing to do with the issue. But anyway, to cut a long story short, I think Mr. Peters may have reacted sharply, not because it was Helen Clark, but because I think he actually does want to pursue this issue on behalf of New Zealand, and he may have thought that Helen was muscling in onto his spot somewhat. I don't know.
Yeah, well, he has been quite combative this week, and I was thinking he could probably have an argument with his own shadow or his own reflection in the mirror in the morning and cut himself shaving if he wasn't careful.
Did respond to Mr. Seymour's comment, though, didn't he? He said you have to be careful what you wish for when he was respectful. I wasn't quite sure what he meant by that, but I don't think he's prepared to be taking any lectures from Mr. Seymour about the conduct of New Zealand's foreign policy. And I think he's got Mr. Luxon in his corner.
And Robert, moving to Ukraine, it's very interesting. I think we've got Zelensky at the General Assembly. The White House is supposedly looking at another package of aid. Trump has been winding Zelensky up and telling him, sort of mocking him in the fashion that he does. And it seems very, and Vance is, again attacking the US support for Ukraine. It looks as though we're creeping towards some setting the scene for negotiations, right, with Russia. There's some movement. I think there's some movement here somewhere.
I think Zelensky says he has a plan. We're not quite privy to the details of that plan, but he said if implemented, he believes Russia will become more responsive. And I think what it means is he part of the plan is for Ukraine to get the long-range missiles it needs and to frighten the dictator sufficiently that the dictator decides that he must negotiate, and that doesn't mean he'll keep the territory, but he'll get out with his life. We'll wait and see. I've heard Mr. Trump's comments. He's been widely mocked in the United States, by the way, and not just by what you might call the left of centre folk, widely mocked on the Republican right for his comments that he discovered. That's the word he used in his speech.
Yeah.
I think it was in Georgia. Was it in Georgia or Arizona? One of the two. He said that he discovered that Russia had defeated Napoleon and Hitler.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this guy's running for the most powerful office in the world.
Yeah. Who knew? Who knew? Yeah.
And
somebody told him. That's what he said. Someone told me.
Just finally, Robert.
Let's hope we're still joking after the US elections and able to do it with a smile on our faces rather than all going to
because he had the last laugh in 2016, didn't he?
Exactly. And, we could all be coming to your bunker in Dunedin.
I think Peter Thiel's bought it.
Yeah. Just finally, Robert, on that note, sadly, Putin has changed the nuclear doctrine of Russia to say that he would respond with nuclear weapons if Russia was attacked by non-nuclear weapons. So how is that featuring in the thinking of everyone? And
I think it's more bluff.
Yeah.
He's been saying horrendous things like that for a long time. And I think the United States has to stop tiptoeing around Putin on that issue. What he's desperate to do is restrain international support for a country which has been illegally invaded by Russia. And by raising the nuclear, the nuclear factor in the past, that has it certainly has an effect on Germany. Again, Olaf Scholz has confirmed in in New York, where he is at the moment, that they will not release the Taurus missile, the long-range missile, because it will be escalating the conflict. Well, if you invade another country, you can't complain when measures are taken to eject the illegal invading force from Ukraine, including bringing the war straight, right into Russia's backyard. So it seems that Mr. Putin's developing a doctrine whereby he's suggesting it's perfectly fair and rational for his country to invade another one, but it's completely irrational and unfair for the retaliation to extend as far as Russia itself.
And
It's an
Robert,
extraordinary situation.
before we go to Matt, just is there anything you would point our audience to just to keep an eye on at the General Assembly this week?
Well, with the risk of sounding parochial, I would say watch out for Mr. Peters' speech. I think it's going to be interesting. And Mr. Peters is a bit of a mercurial person who likes to defy predictions. He may see an opportunity to really ram home. I think to be his credit, he made a very tough speech in the General Assembly. I think it was in April. I think he may sense there's a degree of urgency now and frustration amongst most small and middle powers. I was struck by the fact that Mr. Peters said on his way to New York, international relations is not just about big powers. It involves small and middle powers as well. So I think he would get a lot of applause in this country if he said that this dysfunctional UN Security Council must, as a matter of urgency, be reformed. I also think he'd get a lot of support from other countries who are very frustrated, as we have been, by the fact that 5 countries at the moment are basically deciding all matters in the world on questions of peace and war, which is ludicrous when you think we've got 193 members in the United Nations.
Thank you very much, Robert.
Robert, thank you very much. Lovely to have you on the show again. And now we invite in a new special guest to the Hoon, Matt Halliday from Comms Declare. Matt, lovely to have you on the Hoon.
Kia ora, Bernard. Hey, Peter.
G'day, Matt. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, could you tell us a bit more about Comms Declare and the F list? This week is a big one in climate activism, as well as the UN General Assembly in New York. We've had the Climate Week series of events, including a speech from Jacinda Ardern. But there's been a lot happening around the world on this issue of what do we do about these fossil fuel companies? Could you tell us about the F list and what you've done here in Aotearoa?
Yeah, so the F list started in 2021 by clean creatives out of the US. It spread really quickly over the last 3 years. Australia, Comms Declare took the mantle up in Australia 2 years ago, so this is their third one. And I started working with Comms Declare through actually Auckland Climate Month last year. So I was on a panel for Creatives for Climate then. And one of the vice president of Comms Declare is a Kiwi now living in Australia. He was, he was keen to get someone on our shore involved, and I kind of picked up the mantle, and we've brought New Zealand into the F list this year.
So what is the F list? Who's on it, and what are they doing?
So it's a list of all the agencies that are representing fossil fuel clients around the world. So that's communications agencies, so advertising, PR, marketing, media. If they're representing a client who makes 50% or more of their profit from fossil fuels, or they're doing electricity generation that is more than 50% fossil fuel, they're on the list.
And who's on the list here in Aotearoa? Obviously, there's one particular company, Z Energy, which has been the subject of legal action about its claims on the climate, and it's still in front of the High Court. But tell us a bit more about who's involved with Z Energy and who else is on the list.
Well, there's 14 New Zealand agencies that we've identified that kind of hit that criteria. I'm sure there are others. As you'd expect, it's not easy to find which agencies are representing fossil fuels anymore, especially since the F list has come out. The interesting thing is Saatchi and Saatchi, who did that Z Energy campaign that we're talking about, they just got an award, which I would need to look at the name of for, I think it was an effectiveness award, bear with me, I don't want to misspeak, for that same Z Energy campaign, which is in front of the courts, as you say, for greenwashing. It's also, Z Energy are one of the 7 defendants in Mike Smith's case as well at the moment.
Yeah, because a lot of these agencies, talk a good game about sustainability and how they're all for the climate, and I'm guessing a lot of their staff are quite thoughtful and worried about the climate and the idea that their company is helping to extend the life of fossil fuels, and not just in terms of selling their products, but also blocking action to reduce emissions and to try to reduce the warming of the planet. How effective is something like this F list with these agencies?
So it's had a reasonable amount of success overseas. There are agencies that have dropped off the F list since, but then at the same time, the big news with last year's F list, it kind of teed up at the same time as a large agency pitch for Shell and Havas, who are an international B Corp. They ended up getting their B Corp revoked because they were the one that took on the Shell account. And then
Let's just explain what a B Corp is, Matt. Sure, because B Corp is a special ranking that you get. The Stuff has it in New Zealand. Kathmandu, I think, has it, and it is a sort of classification that suggests you're running your business for the good of everybody. Yeah.
And it's kind of a tough bar to get over. There's a lot of hoops to jump through to get that B Corp certification, and then B Corps all over the world complained, and Havas had that status revoked.
Interesting.
And then we're seeing a similar case at the moment where Right Communications are a B Corp in New Zealand. They have Z Energy and they have Genesis Energy in their clients, and again, these are two that are in the Mike Smith case at the moment.
What's the Mike Smith case? Is that
So
is that the greenwashing one?
No. So there's two separate cases. So there's a greenwashing case, which is Lawyers for Climate Action. Bernard.
Yes, that's right. And also, I think the Environmental Defence Society. I can put the links in the show notes, and we had them in the article that talked about Comms Declare's list yesterday. And you're right. This is starting to get legally and politically noisy, which is good for those companies who have represented fossil fuels. And so far, I've been able to get away with saying, on the one hand, they're lovely, jubbly, sustainable companies, but on the other hand, they're doing a lot of work to extend the life of fossil fuels.
Yeah, and that's the thing as well, is that it's now fossil fuel companies aren't denying climate change anymore. They can't. But it's about stasis now. How long can we drag the chain for? And if you look at, they talk about their targets, but there's a lot of weasel wording in the way that they frame it, as far as, it's not going to be as fast as everyone wants. And the ad, the print ad that launched Z Energy's campaign 2 years ago, the headline was, "We're in the business of getting out of the fossil fuel business."
Yeah,
Peter,
may I ask? I wound up Bernard very slightly on the way. Forgive me, sorry, Bernard. I wound up Bernard very slightly on the way into this with our session with Catherine before you came on, Matt. Aren't these advertising agencies? I mean, they're not promoting the consumption of fossil fuels. They're promoting brand choice in fossil fuels in the same way that cigarette advertising was never about smoking. It was about choosing which was the right cigarette for.
I heard that cheeky little drop that you put in at the end of the segment there, Peter. Yeah, so there's lots of arguments there. You can say, hey, it's just about market share. You'll notice that they don't advertise fuel anymore. They're advertising, like BP advertises wild bean in the coffee. Z Energy is this moving with the times thing where they're talking about their EV chargers or their coffee or their pies, or a rest stop for a taxi driver. But then at the same time, and this is another bugbear of mine, is our incentive schemes. If you look at any of the loyalty cards and rewards, it's all based around supermarkets and fuel companies who are both screwing us at point of sale, and their margins aren't going down while our costs are going up and up and up.
And it's interesting to see some town councils, some states, particularly in Europe, starting to take their own initiatives. I think Edinburgh decided to ban a bunch of outdoor advertising for fossil fuels and for cars. There are, I think, a couple of cities in
the Netherlands. So Haarlem was the first one, I think, which is a near neighbour to Amsterdam. Amsterdam wasn't far behind, and that's the councils banning advertising on their own spaces that they have as the council and that they run. And it is a wider remit than what we're talking about with directly fossil fuel companies. I'm not sure for all of them, but I think the Harlem one is everything from flights, SUVs, high and other high kind of internal combustion engines, as well as meat and your fossil fuels. So Edinburgh is similar. The one that is kind of slightly different, which is a world first, is The Hague. It's a couple of weeks ago now. They announced that at the start of next year, anywhere within the city limits, whether private or public property, it's illegal to advertise these sort of products.
And what's the response you've been getting from the advertising community? You'll know a few mates in there. What are they saying to you? You know, when you're queuing up for your coffee and you ask for a flat white, and
Not in a
you
white,
say,
but not in a wild bean place at BP station. I hope.
No, I'm in my ivory tower here at AUT. I'll be honest, Bernard, I haven't really heard from them. To be fair, though, and I'll give credit to Nikki Wright on this one from Wright Communications. She reached out. They were the one that kind of was a big front runner because they are the B Corp and they are saying that they're on the right side of it, and that they're from her position is that she's working from the inside and trying to change it. We kind of see it that, you know, you're taking money from these companies, and despite the fact that they're doing all these little pet projects that are sustainable and doing good things, that they're still kind of taking money off the big, and they've got the influence on them.
The thing I find interesting about the timing now about fossil fuel companies and car companies still trying to co-opt some of the green messaging and sustainability stuff is that 10 years ago you could accept that what they were doing was changing themselves. And the poster child for this in New Zealand was, of course, Z Energy. And Z Energy, essentially, it's an invented brand. It used to be the Shell stations. The New Zealand ownership, Infratil and the New Zealand Super Fund, took Shell and decided to rebrand Z Energy and talk an enormously high game about getting out of fossil fuels, going electric, creating bioenergy, and we're the good guys. Trouble is, it was just advertising. At the end of the process, when eventually it was sold to Ampol, Z Energy still is all about the petrol and the diesel. You very rarely see electric connections, and they eventually cancelled their biodiesel plant because it was too expensive, they said.
It was the same year that the ad came out. It was the end of that year they cancelled it because I think it was a margin of about 2 cents a litre that they couldn't negotiate past. And
so I think there is a feeling of bitterness amongst people who bought the messaging over the last 10 years, and now people are saying, I'm not going to give you a second chance. You misled us once. We're not going to let you mislead us again. And we've seen time and again all over the world, fossil fuel companies say, yeah, we can change ourselves. Just let us voluntarily get together and do it. And there's always a delay. There's always a reason why things can't be done. There's always a dead end to go down, be it carbon capture or nuclear. And at the end, we can't wait anymore. It's time to...
The timing is right now. And that's the thing. And Duncan Meisel, who's part of Clean Creatives, puts it in a really nice way. He says it's kind of like saying, look, we're really trying to fight obesity, and we're only advertising the apple slices at McDonald's.
Yeah.
And the toys. Yeah.
The toys is the one he used, but I thought the apple slices were a little dicey.
Yeah. So what's next? What other things can be done to essentially turn the fuel companies into the tobacco companies of yesteryear?
Well, and that's the thing. The advertising and the PR companies are a small part of it. There were agencies back in the late 80s and early 90s that kind of said, look, it doesn't matter about regulation, we're not going to do it anymore. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for the agencies that want to draw that line in the sand and say, yeah, we're with you. We're not going to take on fossil fuel clients. Or hopefully some of the 14 on the F list go, you know what, we're done. Let's declare for the climate.
And is there any attempt to sort of reach out, particularly to the young workers in these companies? There's a lot of sensitivity about if you're running an agency and suddenly your best creatives come into the office and say, boss, I'm not going to kill the planet anymore by promoting these guys. Dump them or I leave. Or I leave to the company that's already drawn the line in the sand.
Well-
Because that's one of these companies, unlike other types of companies where they have capital tied up in factories and brands, these agencies, really, they're just a bunch of people, and the equity in those companies walks out the door each night, and it's the most important thing for them.
And that's, I think that's it, is that there's some research out of the UK that I referenced in one of my conversation articles earlier in the year, that the concern amongst industry creatives is higher than concern amongst the public. About people that work in the advertising industry. There's a lot of smart people in the advertising industry. Their brains are fast. They go from client to client, working on different briefs, and you have to get to grips with it really quickly. There's talk amongst the industry, and one of the things that Net Zero talks about is that kind of behavior change campaigns and using these fast brains to help shift society towards the change that we need. But that's the reason we exist as Comms Declare, is that it's no longer individual efforts. We need stuff happening from the top. So getting agencies, and the big network agencies, would be amazing. As far as if a network says, hey, we're going to sign on for Clean Creatives and Comms Declare globally. But all of those big networks were represented in the F list.
Fantastic, Matt. Thank you very much for coming on to the show. We'll be watching with interest what happens next, and next year, see who else is on it or off it, and whether we see some change through there. Matt Halliday from
thanks
Comms
very much.
Declare. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
So, Bernard, let me ask you a question about New Zealand politics. So that you have suggested at various times that you think Luxon is so inexperienced and weak that he'll get rolled by the National Party. Are you still putting your money on that? Or any money on that?
I think there are rumblings within the National Party with people who are really concerned about how Luxon seems to have allowed himself and National to be captured by New Zealand First and ACT, not only in a sense that he gave up an awful lot in a negotiation where he had all the power and they didn't really have much power at all, because they could never join up with Labour. And he seemed to misjudge his own power there and essentially got white line fever and just decided he had to rush to score the try and get in and become Prime Minister. In the process,
Excellent
he gave away an
metaphor
awful
there,
lot. Yeah. In the process, he gave away an awful lot. In particular, these issues around smoking, where there's a lot of upset people within the National Party and New Zealand First, voters for those who suddenly realised, actually, these New Zealand First and ACT MPs who are promoting these things and ramming through policies didn't really talk about this much before the election, and they seem remarkably, let's say, consistent with the lobbying from various groups. There are very close connections between New Zealand First and various industries that are worth noting, and certainly this is different from what even National Party voters were expecting. Secondly, they can start to see Christopher Luxon getting a little grumpy around the edges,
He certainly does.
it was interesting to see some of the. I often look at unusual things to get a sense of how newsrooms and opinion leaders are making judgments. And one of the things I find interesting is the placement and the choices of still photos to illustrate articles. Those are often decided at a high level by editors or by executive producers. And lately, the grumpy pictures of Christopher Luxon as the background image to describe things are the ones that are being used. We've had a couple of cases just in the last week, him snapping back at Benedict Collins from One News over the
Nobody's watching the
targets.
6 o'clock news, Benedict.
Yep, sorry.
Nobody's
Yeah,
watching the 6 o'clock news anymore, Benedict.
That's
Yeah.
right. In which Luxon came back with, it's not about the frickin' targets. Well, actually, for 9 months, you've been saying it's about the frickin' targets.
Yeah, exactly.
And then today, the snapping back at the CEO of ANZ, it just looked it just looked like someone under pressure lashing out. And we've seen a bit of this lately where he has appeared angry in public. He's also pulled back from a lot of the opportunities to be questioned by journalists. He's not done a single interview yet with Jack Tame since he's become Prime Minister. He has stopped probably a good half a dozen post-cabinet news conferences each year at the current rate. He's stopped some of the appearances through the tile, so to speak. This is where it's a free-for-all and journalists can jump in and ask any question. He is getting grumpy.
Have you got a interview request in for the Hoon, Bernard, if not for the Kaka? And remember, you made a gin and tonic on air for Nicola Willis. Can we get her back now that she's not now that she's not in the opposition? We need to get him on.
Yeah, I've got several.
And he's got a batch in Waiheke. You could get him on in his jandals.
Yeah,
Hopefully not in his budgie smugglers, but
renew the requests. That is a good point. I need to be reminded to keep nagging.
Good. Well, it's not. Well, if it's not me that's going to remind you, it'll be somebody who lives a little closer to you. Bernard, I've got a small skateboarding dog. But I thought I'd also just say, because you were talking at the beginning about subscribers and so on, and I mentioned this to you last night when we were out, but I just want to say thanks to David Coombs, who's one of our most loyal listeners, who engineered to come all the way from Parnell. He's in a wheelchair, but he came all the way to have a coffee with me the other day, which was just delightful. It made me feel like part of a Kaka community of Hoons, and it was terrific. My skateboarding dog, I actually found it quite difficult to find a good one this week, and I've mentioned this before, but I not this particular bit that I'm going to say, but Steve Brownius has done an absolutely astounding job of the Pokinghorn trial. And one of the things that he's done, of course, is talk throughout the trial, it would appear, to Madison Ashton, who the cops couldn't get to come because she ran away to Morocco, them having given her ample reason to decide that that she wouldn't turn up at court. But also, Steve seems to have really bonded with Pokinghorn and everybody else in that courtroom. And he said in his piece in the Herald the other day that Pokinghorn was writing a lot on his laptop during the case. And Steve writes, he asked me one day for the name of my book publisher. The next day I said to them, "You asked me that because you're writing a book, aren't you?" He said that a good title would be Guilty Until Proven Innocent.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll see that.
I'm one of these people who just cannot get my head around true life crime. Is it real life crime or whatever? This whole, and I'm sure that there is someone selling.
Oh, we could turn the Hoon into a true crime podcast. You're right.
True crime. Oh my God, no.
And then, yeah.
No,
all right.
There will be a podcast on the Pokinghorn trial. It's been too, juicy to avoid.
Yeah.
But that will be the book. I'm sure someone, and if it's
it'll be Steve. I'm sure. I suspect.
Maybe Steve ghostwrites the one from Pokinghorn.
Yeah, good idea. Well, I don't think he'll do that. Anyway, lovely to see you, and lovely to see you, everybody, as well. Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Lovely to have you back, Peter. That has been another Hoon on the Kaka. It is Thursday, the 26th of September. See you all next Thursday night at 5 o'clock. Ka kite anō.
See you, Bernard. Bye, everybody.